good to see everyone.
It's good to see you.
It's so good to be seen by you. Yeah. How many of us love to watch the old spaghetti Western movies and TV shows depicting what life was like in the early forming of our nation? Some of us are old enough to recall Gunsmoke, the OK Corral, How the West Was Won, or Clint Eastwood's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah. I'm bad. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Which one are you? In the Wild, Wild West, people lived by the power of the gun. The gunslingers and the outlaws faced off with the sheriffs and the deputies. The cavalry faced off with Indians, and even politicians would sometimes solve their conflicts with guns. Surely we can all recall the history lesson about Alexander Hamilton's and Aaron Burr's duel. Consider other popular characters like Jesse James, Dillinger, and Bonnie and Clyde. They all lived by the gun, and they all died by the gun. And the stories of their lives became folklore and glorified in books and on screen. And those stories, some would say, help to play into the culture of violence that we have become. So are we a violent people? Recently, a couple of folks I know personally received threats of violence made against them. Someone else advised that I get a gun in preparation for the coming Civil War. And I pray that such doesn't happen in our lifetime. But there are or have been a growing trend among African Americans who support gun ownership rights in recent years. But surely if we all armed ourselves against one another, there would be no happy ending to this American experiment. The Second Amendment must not be allowed to become the centerpiece of our democracy. I said the Second Amendment must not be allowed to become the centerpiece of our democracy. I'm reminded of the passage in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, 52, when Jesus was about to be arrested and one of his followers drew his sword in resistance. Jesus said to him, "Put away your sword, for those who live by the sword will also die by the sword." One doesn't need an advanced theological degree, but simply read the Bible to see that Jesus was a peacemaker. He taught and preached peace. For blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. But while the majority of Americans identify as Christians, we're not always recognized as peace-loving people. But known for our freedoms, indeed we're known for our freedoms, we are still plagued with continued cycles of violence, specifically gun violence. Just this week, we saw 2 mass shootings in Missouri and Illinois. On Monday, 2 mass shootings in North Carolina and Ohio on Tuesday, a mass shooting in Texas on Wednesday, potentially a shooting claiming the lives of 8 people right here in Broken Arrow on Thursday. You're still waiting for the results. Mass shootings in Pennsylvania and Ohio on Friday, and a mass shooting in Florida yesterday. These happen so often now, they no longer garner front page reporting. And sadly, our reactions and responses to them are becoming more and more muted, as if we're, dare I say, getting used to them, or perhaps we're just becoming numb. In fact, There have been over 500 mass shootings in America so far this year. 500. Let that number sink in, if you will. Several of them here in our state, and yet none of what we are experiencing is a completely new phenomenon. The gun culture is in our national, historical, and constitutional DNA. It's who we are. At least that's who we've accepted ourselves as being. Why then are we so surprised that today there's rampant gun production and consumption with little, if any, safeguards or regulation, or that violence is glorified across our nation? Just look at our movies. And I will tell you, I like a good action flick myself. But personally, I have some thoughts around gun violence. You see, my family's history involves all sorts of violence. And I will share a little of my story, although it may be a little disturbing to some. Those of you who know my story know that 2 of my brothers were brutally murdered in 2 separate incidents. And a 17-year-old nephew was shot to death at the hands of another 17-year-old over my nephew's refusal to join a gang. Growing up, there was much violence at my home. My father was an abusive man and a felon. He would come home drunk and shoot up the house to terrorize his wife and children. My mother said that he would often beat her, and on several occasions he would put the gun to her temple, still warm from when he fired it earlier. And he would threaten to shoot her brains out just because he could. Throughout his life, he would be involved in the deaths of 3 men in 3 separate acts of violence, 2 of which were gun-related. He would spend 2 long stretches in the penitentiary as a result. The first stretch was on death row, which was later commuted to life and with the possibility of parole, in which he was granted parole in 1976, only to return to prison 15 years later. While I certainly make no excuses for my father's behavior, I do understand the types of violence associated with poverty, oppression, and the lack of opportunity in education, specifically among Black males. What happens when a powerless and oppressed person gets a gun? Having an instrument of death, someone might be emboldened to kill, steal, and pursue paths of destruction, even within their own household or communities. And this is what we see a lot of in the Black community. This is what many people of color often face within their own communities. For generations, they've faced it. The power dynamic is something I rarely hear discussed. And yet it is probably linked to more violence than we know. The ultimate power that a gun gives its handler. In an article for The Guardian entitled "Gun Demanding the Psychology of Why People Want Firearms," author and neuroscientist Dean Burnett writes, quote, "Many gun owners confess to feeling vulnerable or naked without their guns. Perhaps this isn't surprising. Having a gun gives you considerable power over people. If you feel small or weak or underachieving or anything like this, dealing with others can induce a great deal of social anxiety. A gun would provide at least one easy way where you can have the advantage over them for once, even if this reasoning only occurs at a subconscious level," end quote. Says a lot, doesn't it? But my mother and grandmother kept small firearms. Growing up, my brothers and sisters and I always knew Mom had a small pistol in her purse, and we had access to it any time. But we better not went near Mama's purse. As a single mom raising 9 children after my father went to prison, my mother said that she had a gun for protection. She recalls several incidents where the gun proved to be her salvation. She speaks of one such incident when she had invited neighbors over for dinner and drinks. We children had all went to bed, and she at one point came upstairs to check on us. And then she heard this loud commotion, this raising of loud voices, and she went back downstairs only to find her neighbor. It was a neighbor, his wife, and his sister. But this neighbor, the man, he was like 6'4", about 300 pounds, and he was glaring at her, and he was raging, walking toward her with a big switchblade, big knife, one of the biggest she's ever seen, she said. And he was walking to her saying, "I'm going to cut your blank to blank neck off." Now, blank to blank are expletives, for those of you who don't know. I'm just not going to say them. But he was walking toward this 5'6", 135-pound woman, threatening to kill her. But little did he know, he brought a knife to a gun battle. She said when he got close, all she knew, she just pulled the gun out and started firing. And the bullets started flying, and so did our neighbor. He ran out, dodging and ducking, and hit that screen door and almost knocked it off the hinge. His wife and sister kept screaming to my mom, "Don't kill him, don't kill him." But she missed all the bullets, she missed. And she said that she was grateful that he was not hit. She said she would not have wanted that on her conscience, even though it would have been in self-defense. She said, "No doubt, though, he would have killed me, and my children would have found my body the next morning." I asked Mom, I said, "Did you call the police?" She said, "No, baby. In those days, we just shut the door and went to bed." Now, some of you may want to judge my mama, but this was her reality, hers and mine. But I want to somehow change this reality for my new grandbaby. I love this child completely. I look at her innocence and her total dependency on her family for her survival and care. Like so many of you who have been down this road before as parents and grandparents, I wonder how I can protect her from the harshness of the world that awaits her. No doubt each of us wonder what type of reality our children and our children's children will have to face in the coming years. Now, I feel that I should say a bit about the good guy with a gun concept. I am painfully aware that people like me and some of you don't automatically fall under Clint Eastwood's category of good. Some of us are likely to fall under the categories of bad or the ugly. And as a private citizen, not only must I contend with the bad guy, some irresponsible person in my own community who perhaps feel empowered by the gun, I must also contend, if not more so, with the so-called good guy in the larger society. Hear me out now. Here in Oklahoma, we have an open carry law on the books. And at everyday places, you might encounter a gun-toting patriot walking in his freedom to carry. And I have to wonder if sometimes, perhaps someone, when he's emboldened by the gun, actually seek situations and opportunities where they get to use them. His right to carry is a clear and present reminder to me that at any time, this good person with the gun can take control over and destroy my black body. And regardless of my 3 college degrees, the community work I do, and the fact that I am a minister, if I am shot dead by the good guy with the gun, whatever story the shooter tells about my death, it is the one that will likely be believed. I said, whatever story they tell about my death, that is the one that will be believed. And no doubt the next step would be that people would scour my past and find reason and justification as to why this good guy would dare use a gun to end my life. I'm keenly aware that if I walked around with a gun on my hip, someone would be likely feel threatened and the cops would be called. And as a person of color, I don't have the luxury or the freedom to gamble with the possibility of interacting with the police while armed. We remember that Philando Castile, a licensed gun owner, was shot down for having a gun, which he acknowledged before the officer shot him. And Terrence Crutcher, like so many other unarmed black men, was shot down in the prime of his life, just a few miles from this place simply because someone with a gun felt threatened. Such incidents underscores concerns about racial profiling among police and how the effects that affects gun rights for different races. I want to be sure that we don't leave the very important component, this very important component of race out of the gun rights and gun violence debate. Because America is seemingly stuck in between opposing forces, the desire to exercise responsibly a constitutional right and the desire to live one's life in peace, where it is not continuously threatened by random acts of violence. I think we all desire to be and live in that paradise. The paradox here is that the ideal of peace and the ideal of freedom appear to be at odds. How could we possibly come to the middle in this very dividing issue? In an article by author Sam Harris, written shortly after the Newton massacre, Sam, a gun owner himself, attempts to present points related to guns. What stood out for me was that he, an avid supporter of the gun rights, and I, a UU minister, could both agree on a lot. He writes, quote, "The Constitution of the United States was written by men who could not possibly have foreseen every change that would occur in American society in the ensuing centuries. Even if the Second Amendment guaranteed everyone the right to possess whatever weapon he or she desired, it doesn't. We have since invented weapons that no civilian should be allowed to own." He further states, "We could do many things to ensure that only fully vetted people get a licensed firearm. The fact that guns in the U.S. can be legally purchased from private sellers without background checks on the buyers and the so-called gun show loophole is terrifying. Getting a gun license could be made as difficult as getting a license to fly an airplane, requiring dozens of hours of training." He said, I would certainly be happy to see policy changes like that. In that respect, I support much stricter gun laws, end quote. Maybe this is what we all need to do. Resisting polarizing forces, we can agree to come to the middle, to seek to enact those laws that various sides can agree on. Despite the fact that certain people on opposing sides seem to want to color the issues surrounding the debate as black and white, these are mostly gray areas for discussion and dialogue. All the polarization has accomplished so far is prevent these issues from finding resolutions. At the same time, there are a number of things in which Americans on all sides of the debate actually already agree upon. This is where we need to expend our biggest effort. And this is precisely why organizations that conduct anti-violence work are so important. Now, when I was in North Carolina, there was an organization against violence which had one of the best mission statements ever. An excerpt from their mission statement reads, quote, "We endorse measures that deal with the underlying reasons for violence, such as poverty, lack of jobs, family breakdown, alcohol and drug abuse, anger and despair, and the glorification of violence in the media. We endorse measures to rehabilitate young, potentially dangerous offenders, to keep abusive spouses from possessing guns, and to remove violent and gun-wielding criminals from society," end quote. Today, we have a chance to support another excellent organization, the Native Alliance Against Violence, whose mission seeks to eliminate all types of violence within tribal communities. These are monumental tasks for any organization, and we applaud their noble efforts. As our society is renegotiating the balance of power, peace, freedom, and justice, we must address the underlying causes of violence and insist on not allowing the middle ground to be rejected or productive dialogue to be hijacked, which is happening a lot in our country. We Unitarian Universalists often exemplify the idea of how people from diverse cultural, ethnic, theological, and even ideological backgrounds can come to live together peacefully and support one another. For this is what we are called to do in these turbulent times. We simultaneously affirm peace and seek freedom. Regarding human freedom, one of our denomination's theological principles states the following: most human beings are free moral agents with the capacity to make choices and are accountable for these choices. Human freedom may be used creatively or destructively. These possibilities are expressed not only in our individual choices and actions, but also in the institutions and social structures we create. Peace is the product of human choices that empower human agency and extend the possibilities for human freedom. Daily, we are faced with a myriad of choices, some of which are easy while others are difficult. Yet it would behoove us to seek making informed choices that are based on our values and principles. Now, I have to make a confession today. With all the arguments and debates about gun rights and ownership, and with my family history and all, and our present reality, my present reality, I personally, I choose peace. I have ultimately concluded that I don't need to have a gun on my hip to feel strong or to feel protected. My experience, intellect, and education make me feel mighty strong. And thus, knowledge will be my weapon of choice. And while knowledge may not stop a good, bad, or ugly guy with a gun, I cannot live my life in fear of any of them, because there is no peace or freedom in fear. Every day I have to choose to trust. Perhaps you have to choose that as well. Every day we have to choose to put our trust in the better angels of our neighbor's nature. I am optimistic about our future. I have no choice, really. We can be optimistic that the best, the good, the greater good will prevail, or we can be pessimistic and doubt that we as a nation, as a people, can make it through. Certainly we have been in dark places and difficult times before. And while there were some who may have lost hope, there were those who held on to hope despite their realities, which gave them little to hope for. I have hope today that as we're making choices, that where no threat is intended, no threat is assumed. I have hope today that we will always be considerate of others and that our choices are guided by our empathy, our reason, and our compassion. I have hope today that peace and freedom will prevail over the power of the gun. I have hope today that we will be one as a nation, not in beliefs, but in a love beyond belief. So let us have hope today. May it be so. Amen.